organization called Housing Conservation Coordinators, HCC. I'll be presenting today about the Community Land Act.
Would you kindly spell your name?
Yeah, absolutely. So first name, M-A-R-K. That's the easy part. The second part is Natanawan. That is spelled N-A-T-A-N-A-W-A-N. Natanawan. Thank you. All right. Yeah.
The organization again.
Housing Conservation Coordinators, HCC. Would you like me to talk a little bit about my presentation today? Would you like me to dive straight into the presentation?
Where makes sense to you?
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so as a tenant organizer working with HCC, I basically work with tenants from roughly 34th Street to 100th Street on the west side of Manhattan. I work with people who are dealing with basically really bad living conditions where they live, sort of neglected apartments and buildings, places with housing violations that need fixing, landlords that sort of engage in harassment and bad practices, and so on and so forth. I help to create tenants associations where people live so they can engage in collective action to improve their living conditions. I also work with tenants to connect them to housing justice campaigns at the city and the state level to create a better New York for all of us. Our organization as a whole serves around 4,000 clients every single year in the community through our organizing and outreach efforts, as well as legal services and weatherization services. So Housing Conservation Coordinators is an ally of the New York City Community Land Initiative. And the New York City Community Land Initiative is basically an alliance of social justice and affordable housing organizations that are committed to winning housing for all New Yorkers. Our alliance includes grassroots, community and faith-based, labor and citywide organizations working to advance community land trusts. That's key. We work to advance community land trusts and address root causes of homelessness and displacement within our city. And so I have my presentation here on my laptop. I could share screen. I think I need to be made co-host. I'm not sure if I'm already co-host.
I can make it so you.
Okay, thank you.
You should be good now.
Okay, fantastic. Let's see. I'm not sure if I still see the option on my laptop. I don't see it down here.
We did.
There's only two items,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, no, that's for next week.
Okay,
We're doing that.
thank you very much.
And I'll see like a green button.
Yeah. All right, yeah. I will start presenting on this as soon as we're all ready to go. Is everybody ready to go?
We're all set. Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about the Community Land Act and how it is designed basically to create pathways to community ownership and real affordability of housing in our neighborhoods. And so the Community Land Act is composed of 4 different pieces: the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, Public Land for Public Good, the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act resolution, and abolish and replace the NYC lien sale. Primarily, I'll be talking about the first 2 components. However, I could also summarize the last 2 components and talk about how they're sort of related to and complementing the first 2 pillars. So first of all, I want to talk about what community land trusts, CLTs for short, are. Community land trusts are democratic community organizations that take land off the speculative market and collectively steward it for affordable housing, community space, small businesses, or other local needs as defined by community members themselves. CLTs maintain the mission of community land stewardship and lease the land to housing cooperatives, other tenant-led nonprofit housing organizations, or directly to low-income families. That is a lot of verbiage there, but basically what CLTs are designed to do is take ownership of land and make sure that land is used strictly for community purposes. Normally, the way it works is if a private business owns the land, they can do it for whatever they want, right? If McDonald's moves in and takes up over a chunk of land, I don't know, they sell burgers. If it's a perfume store, they sell perfume. If a developer wants to produce high-end luxury apartments, then that's what they do. Community land trusts.
What you described within the law and that there are regulations for the choices of the use in the description.
Yeah, so I could dive into the specific bills we're proposing and how they would specifically empower nonprofits and community land trusts with specific qualifications.
That's a whole question. So we should hold our questions till the end.
So unclear.
Yeah, yes, please. Yeah, just so I can get the information out there and then you all can respond after. Please do bear with me for a moment or two as I sort of talk about this. But yeah, basically CLTs own the land. They are strictly designed for like socially beneficial community purposes. And they lease the land to what was it again, owners that would do different things with like the land, the buildings that they own. And so guys can see here that there are 20 different community land trusts that are operating across New York City at the moment, each of them operating affordable housing where they live or other different types of community spaces. So when it comes to support for the Community Land Act, it's currently very widespread. Almost 2/3 of city council members are co-sponsors of COPA and Public Land for Public Good. So basically near a supermajority. 2/3 of city council members have also committed to not reauthorize the tax lien sale. The tax lien sale, which I can explain towards the end, is basically, it is a specific sort of like piece of law that existed in New York City relating to the way that they deal with property debt. We don't need to dive into that right now because it's not the main piece of this. Over 115 community groups, actually I can update that, it's over 130 community groups have endorsed the Community Land Act, including community CBOs, CDCs, tenants associations, and also CDFIs. Community Development Finance Institutions, no problem. New York City voters are also in favor of the CLA. 80% of voters support NYC prioritizing social housing, as opposed to for-profit housing. 72% of voters support prioritizing not-for-profit developers for public land disposition. 60% of voters say that the city should financially support nonprofits and CLTs to build more housing. And 82% of voters support TOPA, the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. And so this is the first big piece of it. It is called the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act. What it does is it gives qualified CLTs and nonprofits the right to make a first offer when a multifamily building is up for sale by a landlord. It is modeled off of successful legislation in San Francisco, Washington, D.C., and other cities that have preserved thousands of affordable homes in the places where they were implemented. And what it does is it basically just engages nonprofits, CLTs, CDFIs, and other community-based organizations in New York City and puts them in charge of apartment buildings in order to preserve and create affordable housing. I can go into the tools here. I don't need to go too much in depth, but basically the teeth of COPA kind of comes through the financing that supports it. So in places where it's been implemented like San Francisco, they have different capital programs to support it. And here in New York City, there would be similar parallels where there are things like the NYC Acquisition Fund, HPD Neighborhood Pillars, and then also other sources of funding through HCR, CPC, and also again, the CDFIs that exist in the city also to support financing. I could talk about one example, which is the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act in DC, which mirrors the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, which is proposed over here. Over the past 20 years in Washington, DC, 20,000 units of, housing have sort of passed through their COPA process. And so when buildings were up for sale, tenants associations decided what would be done with the buildings, and they decided to partner with nonprofit, basically organizations a lot of time to preserve their apartments as affordable housing. And so out of these almost 20,000 units, around 16,000 units were preserved as affordable housing in the end, around 85% total. And 80% of units received repairs and renovations through the process as well. So not only does it preserve affordable housing, it also helps to fix up rundown apartment buildings. And as we know, as New Yorkers, there's a lot of rundown apartment buildings which could use fixing up by responsible community stewards instead of landlords, which don't really have an incentive to fix things up and invest their money in that. And so one case study we have here is the East New York Community Land Trust is currently working with tenants at 248 Arlington Avenue to purchase and convert the building to permanently affordable tenant-controlled housing. You guys can actually read news articles which have just come out, I think 1 or 2 months ago, about the sale of the building successfully going through to the East New York CLT. And so now they have 21 units of affordable housing, which will remain affordable according to their designs from now, basically until the end of time. The land is stewarded by the CLT, it is maintained affordable, and it always will be affordable. Secondly, I want to talk about the public land for public good piece of this. So if the first piece is talking about what happens when a building is up for sale and prioritizing nonprofits, what this does is it looks at public land that is currently owned by the city. And what it does is it requires NYC to prioritize qualified CLTs and nonprofits when disposing of city-owned land to ensure that public land is used for public good. Once again, instead of giving it to some random corporation for luxury apartments or, I don't know, perfume store or whatever, give it to community land trusts to create things for the public good. So what was it again? Right now, the way it works, most public land dispositions are automatically sort of rewarded to for-profit developers, which exacerbates gentrification and placement. Instead, what we want to do is encourage more collaboration between nonprofits and for-profit developers, including MWBEs, to build community wealth where we live. As you all can see here from this map, public land dispositions are concentrated in low-income Black and Brown neighborhoods that need the deepest levels of affordable housing. So when we're talking about public land and how it's used, really we can see that the stakes here are what happens in the neighborhoods that are sort of the front lines of kind of gentrification and displacement at the moment in New York City. And so what we can see is that a lot of the homes that are built on public land at the end of the day are not really affordable to medium income families in each neighborhood. In East New York, it's a fairly solid majority. In Brownsville, East Harlem, and Mott Haven, it is sort of the vast majority of homes that are built that are not affordable. And so what the New York City Community Land Initiative has found through their own studies is that when nonprofits are selected to take over public land, they are twice as likely to build affordable homes for neighborhoods than when for-profit developers take over these chunks of land. This is about fighting gentrification and displacement, and once again, creating land that's stewarded by the community and accountable to the community. What they also find, different studies, is that there are significant higher rates of violations in apartment buildings when they are sold to private speculators, as opposed to being placed in sort of publicly supported affordable housing projects. So once again, let's try to make quality housing that's actually taken care of by the people. And so a case study here is a project which is called HEARTS. That stands for Holistic Health, Education, and the Art Center. This is created by the Mott Haven, Port Morris Community Land Stewards Organization and South Bronx Unite. And so what they're doing is basically taking an abandoned city building and turning it into a center for hosting nonprofits in the neighborhood, which have been under pressure due to rising rent in the area they live, making sure that they have a permanent home so that they can serve the community. And so, yeah, that's basically the end of the presentation there. Once again, I can bring it back to just sort of like the slide that has a summary of the different components of it. So you all can ask questions about the specifics of how they work, what the implementation is, the benefits, and so on and so forth. I'm happy to answer any questions right now and also take back any further questions that you have to the coalition about this.
Could you just go very quickly go through the lien sale?
Yeah, absolutely. So New York City lien sale was basically a system that existed up until 2022. And what it did is it allowed New York City to sell property debt from buildings that, like didn't pay property taxes to private creditors. So it almost privatized property tax debt. And so what that allowed private actors to do is to come into buildings that are under financial distress and demand debt from them. They could impose like high tax rates. So basically taking down people for money and giving that job to private collectors. What it ended up doing is putting a lot of buildings in financially distressed neighborhoods, once again, disproportionately Black and brown communities, and sort of allowing them to be taken over by private speculators. The process ended up being extremely harmful, sort of disproportionately to low income property owners in different neighborhoods. And so what we proposed is sort of replacing that property debt collection system and making it so that the city, when facing sort of like properties that are in debt, foreclosing them and potentially turning them over to community land usage instead. I see you have a question about it.
I think you sort of answered my question. So the alternative would be for the city to just take them over and throw everyone out.
Yeah, so basically, the way it would work is first, the city would give a notice to people that basically you have to pay your property taxes, right? If they don't respond to that, they could send another notice, this time informing them that like interest has been applied, or we're gonna add on additional fees because we haven't paid yet. If they still do not pay, then the city can sort of move to, what was it again, foreclose on the property.
This is the old NREM.
But wouldn't that be worse off for the tenants because a private debt collector can compromise on the debt, whereas the city would have to extract 100 cents on the dollar for other people on the street. So wouldn't it be much worse for them to do it that way?
Yeah.
Well, also,
Getting to the
we're talking about
Mhm.
it's the landlord that owes property taxes, right? Not the tenants, right?
Right, but if the city
So
took it
the
over.
building can change owners, but that doesn't necessarily mean the tenants are gonna be thrown out.
I don't mean to ask, but I think some of us were old enough to be here in the 60s, 70s, even the early 80s. We know what happens. This is how the city ended up being the largest owner of property in New York.
Absolutely.
Okay, so,
Landlords abandoned, yeah.
Basically, the idea.
and it had some benefits. How you
Yeah,
get
the idea is basically.
tenant owned co-ops.
Give the city to, whatever they sell the building to nonprofits,
Yeah,
rather than putting it up for auction to anybody. So
right. So I think the idea was create a process that at the end emphasizes transferring a lot of properties to either some form of community land bank or direct ownership by a community land trust if it reaches like the very end of being foreclosed upon.
what's the status of that?
So right now, basically the lien system as it existed before expired in 2022. The city right now has not created a replacement. And so they're still debating about what they want to do with that and like what form it might take.
But that's a lot less fleshed out than the rest of it.
Yeah, basically it's not like currently our top priority and the city doesn't look like it's moving on that immediately. But definitely do want to explain that core of it because it was a big fight sort of a couple of years ago when we were trying to get rid of this predatory sort of like, property tax collection system.
Kelly?
Well, city council hasn't taken any action on this.
I think they've done a lot of debating back and forth. Yeah.
So how would a CLT take over a building and have the funds and the resources to make it permanently affordable for the people who are there and keeping the people there? How does that happen?
Yeah, really good question. And actually, I do want to tie in the explanation of you guys see two things on the screen, right? There's the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act and there's the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. So COPA, Community Opportunity to Purchase Act for short, is a bill that's proposed at the city level. TOPA is at the state level. TOPA would involve the way that it's written in the legislation, funding that would be attached to it, sort of support the acquisition of buildings by like nonprofit organizations, by CLTs, working with tenants associations in the case that a building sale is happening. So we know that like, I don't know, 20 tenants living in a building by themselves aren't able to cough up a couple $1 million to take over a property. What the city would do is allow, these tenants to partner with organizations and then apply for funding with the government to be able to finance their acquisitions. So once again, jumping forward to the slide over here, there's different programs that exist in San Francisco, for example, where they have a version of COBA to help tenants with that process and organizations with that process. Here in New York City, it would come down to programs like HPD neighborhood pillars. And so actually what some lawmakers are fighting for this year is to fund neighborhood pillars with $1 million in this year's budget, which would go directly to the cause of preserving affordable housing in the city. So what was it again? Yeah, specifically like rehabbing, fixing up, creating like apartments in like, buildings that currently exist and making sure they're affordable.
Seema and.
I had two quick questions. One is,
I think Klari had it.
oh, sorry.
So can you name any examples of New York City owned property within the community or 7 district that might come up for sale?
Well, so you're talking about public land, like city-owned land
That's
specifically?
what your third thing was about, right? Public land for public good, that the
Right,
description was
right.
when the city has land, it is going to sell, it doesn't need and is going to sell.
Yeah.
We just had one at the 96th Street, power station.
That wasn't the city, that was.
That was
That
not,
was,
Well, no, it's the MTA, but.
no, it's actually
so there was a difference.
That's the city.
HPD is.
yeah, that's the city, yeah.
You're right.
Okay, that was one then, done, but
The garage. And the garage. And 108th Street.
Yeah, actually,
still-
I would take it back to you guys. Like, are you familiar with any like public spaces, like, like city-owned lots, like you can?
We probably know all of the city-owned lots.
At 108th Street, there were 3 garages that were improperly being rented out by the city. It was not what the land use was supposed to be. And it took a lot of years of fighting background that finally a ULURP and establishment of over 300 units of variety of housing. And now there's one, the last garage is the second building from Columbus going towards Amsterdam. And that's going in the process of all the rebuilding, probably 85 senior units.
Oh,
there. So that's public land
that's great. That sounds like a win.
with not for profit.
Yeah, no, it was a win.
Yeah.
Seema?
Two questions. One is, so for the COPA, community opportunity to purchase, is there a set of defined community uses that are acceptable? And maybe some that are not acceptable?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me look at my notes here, just so I can read off of like some text, pulled directly from the legislation. So the way that COPA would work is qualified nonprofits must demonstrate a commitment to providing affordable housing for extremely low, very low, and low income residents, and to ensuring community representation, engagement, and accountability. Nonprofits also must demonstrate legal and financial capacity to acquire and manage residential properties or partner with another entity that has such capacity. HPD will recertify qualified nonprofits every 2 years and investigate any complaints brought against them to ensure compliance with COPA requirements.
Right, so would that include like shelters and that kind of use as well?
Yeah, I mean, I know that, what was it again? Community like land trusts and nonprofits, tinker with a lot of different models, right? So some of them go for supportive housing.
Right.
Some of them go for just like regular affordable housing. There's different types of like things that you can throw into the mix there.
Got it. My second question is, how do you get the word out? Because I feel like you offer such a valuable service. Yeah, I mean, aside from
Are
this
you-
meeting here.
Are you all free this Thursday?
Okay, go ahead.
So there's a rally at City Hall Park for the Community Land Act.
Tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I forgot. Thursday's tomorrow. Sorry, this is going by for me. So I'll be there. Some of the tenants that I work with will be there. A lot of other organizations, the coalition will be there. Like I said, there's 130 endorsing organizations across the city. And a lot of city council members already on board with this.
What's the status of it?
So the bills of the Community Land Act still have to be reintroduced by city council this year. And then after that, you know, they'll be like sort of debated on and like voted in, later this legislative season. But first of all, well, actually, sorry, I have to like retract my previous statement. The city council speaker has to put them up for a vote, right? It's one thing for people to support something on paper, but it's another thing for legislators to actually put it out there on the floor and push it forward. So that's really why we're rallying tomorrow, and it's what we're gonna be fighting for in the coming months.
Is there a council? Is there a council person who is the lead on this?
Yeah, what was it again? I believe it is Marina Sanchez when it comes to the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so.
Let's hold to the end,
Can
what
we
we
go
can do.
Can I?
Let's make sure we understand it first, and then we'll have a discussion about what we can do to help.
I was this close to getting your endorsement.
Okay.
No, please
Yeah,
go
my
ahead.
question is, if I wanted to create a community land trust entity, what is the corporate structure and how would I do? What's the first thing I need to do?
Ooh, that's a great question. So the New Economy Project is sort of the coordinating organization for the New York City Community Land Initiative. They have a lot of like sort of in-house expertise when it comes to supporting the creation of CLPs. Some of them like for Square, like, you know, CLP, they operate over 20 buildings in Manhattan. They've been doing affordable housing for a long time in our communities. Others are very new and just sort of recently became up and running. To answer your question, New Economy Project and other organizations across the country sort of have the in-house technical expertise to try to help with forming CLPs. Different CLPs have different models for running their operations, but all of them sort of have some form of operation where the board of directors is composed of different representatives from the community to make sure that it is managed and governed in a way that represents people's interests.
Would I have to get certified, with an entity within the city, or how does that work?
That is a very good question, which deserves an answer from somebody with more expertise than me. I can take that back to the.
You have a,
Okay,
have a
thank you.
website or on this last screen, can you put that up again so people?
Yeah,
can look at it?
absolutely.
And then FO.
So when we're talking about experts, for example, I would say Will Spizak from New Economy Project, he's a great advocate for this.
Okay.
And he's been working in it for a number of years. So you can definitely reach out to him. I would be happy to connect any of you as well directly.
Okay, thank you.
FO.
Thank you. As I understand, the state is engaged in some of this and the city is engaged. At this point, have you been able to both, but you've been lobbying, but also to be collecting the record of, let's say, the state's advocacy and accomplishment and the city's advocacy and accomplishment? Is the city the one leading in trying to promote this terrific program? Though I see that you have the state legislatively and administratively can do it also. Secondly, a different kind of question. I could answer it, but I'd rather someone else do. When you commented on that a kind of land that it could be a target and has been, is public land. And I wonder if you can also give us some examples of where it has worked on public land. And, you know, it might be, if I were just hearing about this for the first time, I would say, so could you, the city or state, take, let's say, public land that is underutilized, but is otherwise designated as a public park, and then move to do that? I just would like to get some sense of how this can be organized so that not only you're terrific, you know, what you are doing and the great organizations, but that some of us could understand both the criteria that has been used, which you've been helpful with, how the state is embracing it, how the city is, and what goes from there. The very last thing is, I was born in East New York. So,
Yeah.
and lived there for 17 or 18 years. So I'm very interested, and I have followed the great transformations and the good work done by many organizations, not necessarily this in East New York, and yet the problems there. That's just a minor biographical note. That means a great deal, because I have every block. Well,
And I know the answer to.
Okay,
the answer
sorry.
to one of Ethel's questions.
Go ahead.
With regard to parks, there's
Yeah.
something called the Blumenthal Amendment.
Yes,
It's
I
a state
remember
thing
that,
from
yeah.
decades ago that basically says, and I haven't read it for decades, you can't unpark park.
Yes, I do.
So
yeah,
with
okay.
regard
I
to
just-
specific
Found that
question,
out from National.
although there might be some, cases in which there's some issue or litigation or
Right, right.
whatever. The specific question is, I think it's unlikely, based on that New York City could say, we're not getting enough people playing baseball in this park, we're gonna sell it to somebody. But I think the question is broader than that. That was an example to which there's an answer.
So let's talk about what, the status of things and what it is, what input would be helpful.
Are we still going around?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry.
So is that Louise?
Louise,
You still have her
no
chair.
Just going by who raised their hand.
Yeah,
Oh,
Miranda?
yeah,
Okay.
so can you go back to the two slides with the data, with the charts, and then the color map?
Yeah,
I wanted to
see that map
before.
No, the other map.
map.
Yeah, the displacement map, exactly. If you could just clarify, I was a little confused
Oh,
about
yeah. Sure.
this one and then the chart following, so if you could just
Yeah, I wanted to.
clarify, so. What are the number of housing units built or preserved on public land?
Yeah, so it's
These are
just.
new units in
Mhm.
that time period?
Yeah. So it basically, it just sort of like highlights like the numbers in different areas. So you can see in some of them it's quite low, and others like, it's a couple hundred or like, several hundred. But basically more is better, right? So the statistic which I read out here, which I can read out for you guys again, in more detail, it's not reflected directly on the map, but I do want to say out loud because it's important.
Sure, yeah.
So the analysis, actually, let's go to the other slide here. This was the important one, right? So yeah, a majority of homes that are built on formerly public land in East New York, Brownsville, Lock Haven / Port Morris, and East Harlem are unaffordable to median income households.
New builds or total housing stock?
Those are, it says here, a majority of homes built on formerly public land.
Okay. So this is.
So I think
new
just
builds.
homes in general that are built on publicly land, formerly public land.
Okay.
Several people around this table have an issue with what it means to be affordable. And I know it's generally geared to AMI, but do you have a definition, a working definition? Do you have
I
a
think-
target?
Well, you guys gave the low, very low, right? A certain.
We did.
Yeah.
I guess what was it again? I could double check on that statistic as well, or basically for you guys the full studies that you have like, like the big picture and I'm not misrepresenting data. I know that there was that like some sort of like agencies or organizations look at it is in terms of like rent burden, right? So if it's 30% or more rent that a household is paying from their income, then that's considered like rent burden.
So it's not geared to AMI necessarily.
Yeah, for here, I'll just say like, I'm reading from the tax, and it says unaffordable to median income households in the communities. And once again, I'll try to forward more information to you guys if that is helpful.
That would be.
Yeah, kind of something this game. I think what this slide is saying is that like basically the buildings being financed on the public land as it's redeveloped are at AMIs that are higher than the the local AMI, if you will, like the hyper local AMI, but isn't the main problem this is demonstrating basically that HPD is not subsidizing deeply enough affordable housing regardless of who the developer is? Like if they put in more subsidy, created all 30% AMI units, let's say, in all the new buildings in Mott Haven, that would be closer to reflecting like the AMI folks living there. So to me, it's like we're kind of maybe not looking at it broadly enough, which is we need more resources and pressure on our city agencies beyond just ensuring they're transferring land to nonprofits, that they're financing housing that is equally affordable. I just want to make sure like we're thinking kind of bigger picture here.
No, that's a really good question, and I guess I'll Yeah, I'll divide up my response into two parts. I guess first of all, I think you really accurately like sort of like established the status quo is bad, right? If a majority to a vast majority of housing that's built on formerly public land is unaffordable to the average person, then that is just bad. So we need to do something to sort of like shift what is happening by the status quo. In terms of the solution, I agree with you also. The housing crisis is a really big, monstrous, complex problem, and we need every single weapon we can to tackle it. So I think we need lots of investment in affordable housing, whether that is subsidies for affordable housing projects, whether that is social housing development sort of authority, which people have proposed at the state level. I also do think that giving lots of money to nonprofits and community land trusts to take up empty public land or underused public land or take over residential buildings in the city and ensure that they remain permanently affordable for communities is a really valuable way to sort of push the ball forward on this. Especially just when it comes to creating spaces for class New Yorkers, ensuring that they remain anchors of affordable housing, not just now, but for generations. Yeah, I think basically safe anchors of housing for the community now and forever is really the purpose of this. And that's why I believe it's so valuable.
So what can we do and when?
Well, I still have my question.
I didn't realize you had.
Okay. There's one, in this whole thing, scheme of things between the private owner and the city, there's actually one group that's not accounted for, which are the lenders. And they may not, they may actually be worse than the private owners when they get a hold of the property because they're trying to protect their position. Just pointing that out. And that lets us enter the cycle that we had in the 1970s. Okay, because if I'm the lender and I can get 80 cents on the dollar versus zero given to the city, I'm going to take my 80 cents on the dollar and I just wiped out the equity of the private owner. I'm covered, more or less. But the thing I'm pointing out is in the bank failures that we had last year, particularly Signature Bank, there were three tranches of mortgages they pulled. One that could stand on its own, one that was sort of not great, and another the FDIC basically still owns, which they have sold a 5% interest in. We've got some guy sitting in a building in Washington looking at a spreadsheet of 500 buildings maybe in the city that they have no idea what to do. And I can promise you the guy in whether they're sitting in DC or an office in Atlanta or Houston or whatever, has no idea how to run New York City buildings. So to me, the first thing is it's really nice that XYZ is the 5% private owner, but what about those buildings? And quite honestly, there are going to be more buildings like that are going to be coming on in the next few years because a lot of owners over leveraged and went for the greater fool theory. There will always be greater fool to buy the buildings. And then the other major bank that did rent stabilized financing is, to put it mildly, still shaky, despite we're not going to talk about the guy with the sheet of money at the mint showing it to his wife. I know what I'm talking about. So there are more buildings coming there, and to me, that's a very quick resource. And if I were at FDIC, I'd love to talk to you and figure out how to get rid of this.
Yeah. I know that there was a group of organizers that were working on that very issue with the collapse of like Signature Bank and what to do with sort of like all of like the assets or like underneath that, and trying to make sure that ownership of those assets was sort of like given away in the most like sort of socially responsible way possible afterward.
I'm not sure that they really ended up doing. And by the way, I just want to point out if things don't, we have somebody who wants to manage that, who we really may not want to manage that. If anybody knows the guy I'm talking about, he's working in New York right now for a few months. That assumes that we have a good steward in DC handling those assets, not always given.
Yeah.
So I would think that, it's great that some of our more typical private developers in New York are holding 5% of it, but the FDIC still owns 95%.
Yeah, so what was it again? I know that this process sort of like strictly pertains to, in terms of COPA, building sales, right? And TOPA, building sales. What was it again? Public land for a public good, obviously deals with like the sale of like city-owned land. When it comes to specific like assets under banks, I'm not sure, honestly, that's a bit of like an area beyond my
But
expertise.
yes, I'm saying
Really,
the banks may be more willing if they're in a situation before, because they're gonna do anything they can to keep it going to the city, because they're gonna preserve their position
Right.
as best they can. And if they can sell it to, how can I put it, the guy who used to have a can of gas, I'm getting, those of us have been through the 70s and 80s, 60s, whatever, we can go back through these cycles. So it's not this neat thing of where the owner doesn't pay their taxes and goes right to the city. I just, anybody who, I think many of us remember that phase, and that's not, it was, you know, there were various levels of people, you know, who would sell the building and sell the building and sell the building. And some of the buildings have been had and valued for $5,000. And in my lifetime, and probably in the lifetime of almost everybody in this room.
The brownstones in the eighties and seventies, streets were for $5,000.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
In Tribeca, it's $1 per bill, back in the eighties, right?
And
That was
yeah,
too cheap, I think.
That's the whole neighborhood for $1,000.
it was an interesting.
For $1, you can buy a whole building, 6-floor building.
It was an interesting time, right? Because a lot of sort of like the co-ops, like, you know, that we have nowadays, like those like kind of like building, that sort of rose around that time when it was a lot of like capital. So we're not gonna return to that time, but at the same time, when there is land that's, you know, this is trying to steer the process towards like more affordable community owned housing.
Right, so, but I'm just mentioning there's these reservoirs that are gonna continue to grow. And it's not gonna get to where we're talking about, but it's going to end up with the cycle of where somebody does less and less and less maintenance. And then by the time it gets to the city, it's going to be very poorly maintained. So we have to figure out how to get those buildings before they go through that cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean,
It's badly maintained or city owned.
Well, yeah, the city sometimes is worse than the guy who was the last in the line before it went to NREM.
And is it clear enough, even though you all are doing extraordinary work, that the current city administration, and they hope to continue that administration, is viewing this kind of program and this commitment as a top priority? You have educated us so much. It's not my impression that this administration is devoting the kinds of even investigation as well as to find where the good places, some places are, to be able to use that as models for the city program. And I would be curious if the city would make this a priority or the administration on housing. There's much rhetoric, but the kind of thing you're talking about, it's tough and good. But you do need the city more than I think it's committed to.
Well, what you're reminding us of is that they would target neighborhoods where these interventions were necessary. There are neighborhoods that are very much at risk.
And the not-for-profits and those who've been working at know it, but you've got to be able to choose with the resources.
So can we go back to Richard's question? What would you like us
Yeah,
to
that's
support?
right.
What would you like us?
Should we go out and pick it?
yeah,
Other than the rally farm.
It was apparently today, there was a big demonstration, the mayor was speaking and the police had to intervene because people were demonstrating on this very topic.
Richard, we have someone from the public on Zoom. Can I promote them?
All right.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sure. And then I could also do you guys want me to answer the question actually before we take?
Yes,
the
yeah, why
last
don't you?
question?
Yeah, as long as-
So, right now, we're trying to get community boards to pass resolutions in support of the Community Land Act. So I shared, the, text, sort of like template with, some of you beforehand that we were in contact with, before this presentation. I could also screen share it, after we answer the questions from the crowd also.
Do you have an estimate of the cost to the city if that bill were to pass?
That's so Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, right? And also the Public Land for Public Good Act, both of those just, prioritize the acquisition of land, by CLPs and other nonprofits. So there's no like strict sort of budgeting there. Of course,
So money is, it's dead, it's mostly borrowed.
so, yeah, we do support, programs like Neighborhood Pillars, funding those to, create capital, which would support the preservation of affordable housing in the city. So we kind of see like Neighborhood Pillars, the funding asked there, and COPA as going hand in hand, together this year.
So where does the core of the money come from to acquire property?
Yeah, I would say like, once again, I can go through the slide right here. Sorry, I stopped sharing screen.
Like the HPD capital budget.
And there was.
Neighbor Pillars is an HPD.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Neighborhood Pillars, the NYC Acquisition Fund, HCR, and CPC, and also like CDFIs around the city provide funding. So the way that housing projects work in general, right, is they get capital stacks of like, financing and funding from different entities. And they try to put it all together to make a viable product at the end of the day.
Can you send our office copies of texts of the acts that you want us to support?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sure thing, sure thing.
How many boards already passed any?
A window.
Not, I
I
know that we're doing a big push to sort of like, present the
And
community boards like
stuffy
right
stuff.
now.
Very stuffy.
So it's kind of like early in the season. Yeah.
Well, unless we have anything more with, this is a very useful presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for all your great questions and the interest.
We're not sure. We have.
I promoted them, but they.
No, I'm here.
Okay.
Hi.
Go ahead.
I was just, I had posed a couple of questions in the chat, and I don't know how many of them, if you had a chance to see them, but I was kind of curious if a lot of these buildings that you're talking about are distressed financially, and therefore can't pay property taxes. That's why they're being, that's why they're being taken. Why the lien process exists, or it did exist. If they were to be taken over by a nonprofit, how would they afford not the purchase but the ongoing maintenance when rents as it is aren't covering the costs of the property tax and other costs that the landlords are incurring?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the different bills right here, they sort of cover different situations. So
but I'm asking about that specific situation. Sorry to interrupt. Like these are built. You're saying one of the things you suggested is that if these buildings that can't pay their property tax are taken by the city, they could be given to these CLTs and run as nonprofits for affordable housing. The costs of operating those buildings are higher than the rents. That's why people are in arrears on their property taxes.
Yeah, no, actually, I hear exactly what you're saying, and that is a good scenario to ask about. The answer I would give is there's two different scenarios, right? You either have a sort of for-profit commercial landlord who takes over the building, or you have a nonprofit entity that takes over the building. The nonprofit entity has potential access to funding and financing from the government under different preservation affordable housing programs to try and fix up the buildings, put them in good condition. This model,
is that what happened with is that what happened with First Food, who just had to auction off 20 buildings because they couldn't keep up with costs without raising rents?
Yeah, so yeah, basically every single one of these, like I would say like CLTs, when they do their affordable housing projects, they do require some kind of subsidy or funding, financing, like to like stay afloat. That's how you have like lower rents at the end of the day.
Yeah.
What was it again? Also, I would say community land trusts, the way they operate, right, is they have like, they aren't trying to create a profit margin for themselves. Everything that they collect for rent more or less goes directly into maintenance of the buildings. So I think also what you have at the end of the day is more of the capital going directly into rehabilitating and improving the homes that they take ownership of. When it comes to a for-profit landlord, typically if they want to recoup their costs, right, they do it one of two different ways, which is find some way to jack up rents in the building, or maybe just hold on to it for a while and flip it for some money later on. Either way, their best interest isn't really fixing up the place, and they don't really gain much, like you said, from investing millions of dollars to fix it up, because that would just be a profit thing for them. It wouldn't profit them.
I mean, I feel like that's a bit of a disingenuous response. If the building has no capital to invest, those CLTs are gonna, go under, just like the landlord is going under. And we see this happening everywhere. But I appreciate you addressing the question, but it doesn't feel like you were looking to give an honest answer. So thank you.
No, I mean, sir, right now I'm working with two buildings that are in that exact condition. And that's why I'm here as a tenant organizer, because I work with tenants that live in living conditions. And so right now the buildings are under sale, and we are currently partnering with a community land trust to sort of like take ownership of these buildings and fix them up. So we know that sort of the status, basically the default situation is we would be operating at a loss. It would cost hundreds or millions of dollars to fix up these places and put them in good condition. But once again, the way that we do make it work is through subsidies and financing support from the government. And that, combined with the fact that we are sort of like trying to direct as much of the rent as possible directly into repairs and maintenance, is how we make it work at the end of the day.
Is there also for property tax relief?
Sorry, say that again?
Is there an opportunity for property tax relief?
Oh, yeah, no, that's another thing, which is like sometimes they have deals between CLPs and the government where they forgive property debt if, like, they commit to preserving a certain amount of affordable housing. So that also is for that. Okay, good.
Wouldn't private owners also have a chance at succeeding in maintaining those buildings if they had access to the same special treatment on their taxes, and maybe then tenants would have an amazing experience?
I know that theoretically, I mean, there's some programs where
there are not.
Apply for,
as a landlord who spends 10x their rental revenue on maintaining the building, and then pays 2x of that in property tax, it doesn't exist.
Hey, Floyd, let it go. Let it go. All right. Are we finished?
I actually want to hear what he said again, and then I guess I could give my response. But yeah, I'll let him.
Sure. I'm saying, as the owner here in the Upper West Side, here in MCB7, that has I pay more. I pay significantly more in property tax than the rent I'm allowed to collect, and as a result, I'm personally funding maintenance of the building out of my own pocket. There is no capital to be had. There are no programs for reducing your property tax. Less than 0.5% of tax appeals for Class 2 buildings are accepted by the city on property tax. These programs don't exist. And if we're asking for them to be created for nonprofits, we should maybe look for opportunities to just help our distressed rent stabilized stock in general in the city, not just for nonprofit entities.
Yeah, well, I guess I was thinking of one specific program that I could think of off the top of my head, which is the city program, which was supposed to help provide funding support to landlords that want to fix up vacant warehouse apartments, right? So that was one program that was put out there with a specific goal of trying to help commercial landlords, for-profit landlords, fix things up where they own buildings. And yeah, I don't want to track landlords in general. I think a lot of them do a very good job of maintaining their homes, and a lot of them put in the money that they should put in to fix stuff up. I guess my point is just when it comes to the most distressed properties that we talked about, the properties that are really broken, sometimes what you need, I believe, is a CLP to come in and fix up the place at the end of the day.
I think he's making a sort of unrelated point that the increase for rent stabilized apartments is smaller than the increase in the property tax. And that's totally independent of everything you're doing, but it's just pointing that out. And that's a legitimate concern.
I am pointing that out, but my concern is just that these CLTs are going to go bust in a couple of years when they don't have the operating costs to manage the properties they're purchasing. But I asked my question. The question's been answered. I will stop interrupting.
Between one person.
Okay, I think we've covered this topic. We have another item on the agenda. Thanks very much. Member of the public, if you want to identify yourself.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, so we have before us the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, which has been released this week. I'll just read the introduction to it from the city. New York City faces a severe housing affordability crisis. Outdated, restrictive, and complicated zoning laws limit opportunities to create new homes and make those that do get built more expensive. The City of Yes for Housing Opportunity is a zoning reform proposal that would address the housing shortage by making it possible to build a little more housing in every neighborhood. Okay, so we have an overview circulated. There's the actual zoning form document, which is long, 790 pages. But there are 8 key components. So I think what we'll do is we'll discuss these 8 key components today, and we'll come up with opinions and any questions which we can submit. And then at our next meeting in May, we're going to have some of city planning to present about the City of Yes. And then after that, we'll have another discussion at which we'll come up with a resolution for against.
It's possible that the way you've outlined it, there are several organizations that have been criticizing this in I think a responsible way, the City Club, others, and there was a great big forum the other night that George Gaines chaired. And there were other people on the panel, and then I kept it because I think we can circulate that too. So I'm just indicating some other movement and
Getting a lot of press.
it's getting a lot of press. So I will just send to the office anything that is useful. But we should, it's that many of the groups are at least questioning.
Where did these, when it is reported?
It is reported.
Tibita?
Yeah. Klari?
Yes, so, and if I may say to Tibita, I have twice questioned our new excellent co-chair as to how his name is pronounced, and if I think I got it right, it's Tibita, not Tibita, so I'm going with Tibita. And hope everybody else will too. I didn't force myself to read every aspect of the third document you sent, which is the zoning text, and all of the comments did look at number 1 and number 2. And it did appear to me that out of the, I think it's agency, the first one has relevance to us. The parking one, the not requiring parking one has relevance to us, and the others kind of didn't. So I'm not sure it's useful for us to say anything really about 6 out of 8.
The parking one does not apply to us because you are not required to build parking below 110 on the west side and 96 on the east side, because we're considered in Manhattan Core. So any parking that's built in new development is optional.
Then maybe only 1 out of 8 is really.
Well, it is relevant to we could weigh in on it because to the extent other neighborhoods have more housing, it reduces the pressure on rents in our neighborhood. We can still.
I think it's useful for us to explore these things.
Yeah.
See what if anything, we can contribute to.
And just remind everybody, the FAR increases in the state budget.
Yep. Yeah, that would be again.
But it's not an increase, it's a removal.
It's the ceiling. It's the ceiling.
Removal of the.
Whether the city uses that or not is a different.
The city would.
12.
12.
Sorry, 12.
12.
It was
was 12 and now it's been removed.
Yeah.
Is that
There's,
About
so
it,
the
it's different.
proponents of
what you do with that is, it's hopefully in the city of yes. I think it is. I think it is. I haven't read on this thing.
Okay, let's go through,
This is uncharacteristic for our.
okay, let's go through, let's go through, the eight, as you said, I agree with you that most of these are not applicable to our, district. But let's go through, 1 through 8 and,
Did we put it up on the screen?
Yeah, do you have the print out
That
or
would be
put it on
helpful.
the screen?
I
It's
don't have.
important to read it.
I read it, but I wanted
No, but just so we know what topic we're talking.
I think.
Okay, yeah, this is a preliminary discussion. We don't have to.
Is it possible?
Max, if I send it, I'll send it right now.
Are you sending it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they do cite the upper west side, the first one.
Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
they do.
I just sent it.
Okay, it may take a second.
Ten, nine, eight, seven, six, five.
So we're gonna go through them one by one.
Yeah.
Great.
Congratulations, you passed the cognitive test.
Only if you can draw a plot.
That meaning another two.
Down by 7.
I mean, come on, no.
One.
By now.
Okay, there we go.
There
Okay, so this is that any building that is being built that you could add 20% FAR as long as it's affordable. Because the example they gave is 100% affordable building in the Upper West Side. But that doesn't really answer the question.
I think it can be a 100% market rate. And then you can add 20% affordable. I think that's.
Okay, and then what I could not find in the text, and I did not read the whole thing, is what would be the conditions for affordable for that 20%? And that I think is so important. Because otherwise we're dealing with that over $100,000 thing again. And I think that we should mention it if they don't.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be a percentage of AMI, probably 80% of AMI. It's probably gonna be what,
The problem.
so, but yes, I think that's something that's worth. Looking into it then.
So 100% of the additional FAR must be devoted to affordable housing.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah,
Which means the landlord has to make money on that 20%, otherwise it's not worth it.
It really
well,
is.
yes, like by the end, on the 100.
I guess what he does is he rent bottoms and floors.
Exactly, that's what I was gonna say, that 20% on the top is going to be the most expensive part.
Well,
So that's-
I know there are rules about the distribution already.
Well, I do question whether it applies to this.
It had,
program.
well, those rules are already existing. It had to be similar units. Up to.
I thought that's
height of
80/20
the
housing.
building and so forth.
And they have to be spread through. They
Right.
have to be concentrated on one floor.
Right.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that all stays in place.
Yeah, I would, yeah, you're making an assumption may not be right.
Units on the top.
These are questions we're
Well,
gonna
you
have.
have that.
So let's enumerate the questions.
Yeah, so one is, how is affordability defined, right? That's probably the question one, right?
This is too great.
How is affordability defined for the?
This is in here
Our
because you
distribution
can build to the zoning envelope here, so. this would allow them to expand it.
the
Yeah.
New York City
Most of it,
established
yes, I agree with that. But this one-
regulations.
I have a more fundamental issue. I think it is economically wasteful to require the affordable housing outside. Because if you got, like the ABC site, 67th, and
Yeah.
a guy can sell an apartment for $5 to $10 million. And if he has to devote a certain percentage of that to affordable housing, it's a very high cost. And somewhere else in the district, he may be able to build twice as many units.
It's just already been a conflict with someone.
Also creating more ghettos.
Well, in this neighborhood,
I don't think in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
but it depends, you know, where.
Up on 10 East of Broadway.
No, I'm just saying if we language is.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
And
That'd be useful. to
May
know.
I say something?
Very useful.
City of Yaruss is not an Upper West Side proposal.
It's
It's a
citywide, yeah.
citywide proposal, so
It is.
anything we suggest has to consider.
It's very much aimed at the other boroughs
Too strong.
to increase the FAR and the general zoning. That does not mean that there isn't relevance here, but if you read the whole thing, the kinds of things that they are providing for more flexibility and increase is, and at the beginning in their first documents, they actually said that. Now I think they're changing I'll send whatever I've collected.
I'm
on what
only
they're doing.
responding because I agree with your point about ghettoization.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be as much of an issue in our district, but they're looking at the entire.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what Shelley said, maybe we should ask the question, does it have to be in the building, does it have to be within, does it have to be within
When they started
nearby?
what happened is they took all the little tenements
Mhm.
and redid them and rented them out, and the new building stayed pristine, if I may say.
another question.
There were a lot of comments
If
in
it
there.
applies to special district,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
whether this would apply in special district.
Unless it specifically said it did not, it would.
Well, I think we should ask.
This is why there are hundreds of pages you have to.
Any changes that maybe Tibita read and none of the rest of us read, or.
It's in the following six.
Yeah, we'll send all these questions. Okay. All right. Is there an advantage for community space?
Yeah.
Within the building? That's another,
There always is,
I know, but it may be
but maybe
different.
they changed it.
Maybe they, who knows?
Okay,
But there's always a bonus for community space. We want to encourage it.
I'm all for it, but I don't know if it's in here.
I take it from the discussion though that there's unanimity on having increasing affordable housing by a bonus.
No.
No.
Not necessarily.
What was that exchange?
That I said, I thought that we
Harry
agreed with
said
the
no.
basic principle that, adding FAR in exchange for affordability is a good thing. And Klari said no.
I don't necessarily agree with that for the reason that I think, well, I mean, no, I don't necessarily agree with that.
We do a quick survey?
Not tonight.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll discuss it, at our next meeting. Let's discuss and think about it over the next. Yeah. Okay, so item 2, convert offices and other buildings to housing. Make it easier for vacant offices and other non-residential buildings to come with much needed homes.
Not really a big issue.
Yeah, I think.
It's not a big thing in the Upper West Side, but
Well, these low 60s are a few office buildings.
It's an issue.
Yeah, yeah. Like the
Enough.
office building.
Where do we have where are all our buildings?
Oh, what?
We don't have.
We're going to, I mean, you've seen the example.
It's called City of Yes. It's not called Upper West Side of Yes.
yeah.
Already over the FAR when it very often for commercial.
That's a good.
Much less.
Right.
You read the whole, or a lot of it.
To me, it's a no-brainer.
I won't say I read the whole thing. I
It's
went through
specified
most of it.
It specified 1990 and I was just
I was
curious.
curious about that. I made the same note.
In the longer summary, it specified 1990 as the cutoff for buildings that they would convert from.
Yeah.
Maybe that's
Yeah,
a question
I
of why
understand why that
1990.
is.
Pre-1990?
No, 1990 and later. Is what I read. If anyone maybe knows anything else,
Yeah.
but I read.
I thought it was 1990 and earlier, because that's where you got the really large
Okay.
buildings.
So maybe just a question of like why they should.
I don't know why this.
Yeah, I was just surprised,
If a building is suitable.
right, and if it's massive, it can be a lot of.
I don't remember 1990 being a specific date. No,
I don't think we were around.
Oh, in history, what was built when?
Nineteen ninety.
Yeah.
And if you, also, there is the potential, even if we agree with the goal, we live in a district in which there are many designated historical buildings and landmarks and so on. So in order to encourage, which I think we all agree about, affordable housing, where will it go? Do we have enough? Is there enough land? What about the landmark buildings and which you want to encourage more affordable housing? In the other boroughs, the particular questions about the landmark may not be quite as salient, though it should be salient every place.
This one doesn't deal with affordable housing at all.
No. That's much
Yeah.
more about
Yeah.
the state budget and the governor's thing and all of the changes proposed with FIR, et cetera, in the state laws. That's not what this is about.
The bottom line is I can't imagine anyone would have an objection to having an empty derelict office building converted into housing for people.
Right.
And it's been the discussion for several years.
Very successful.
For years. May not work as much now, because you create communities, not just by the conversion of house, residential, you need schools, you need places, you need, so it's much more than, although it's good to, I'm in favor, but that's not creating a community with housing.
What's
The
happened,
kids go to private
it's
school.
not true. What's happened downtown in the Wall Street area is a perfect example.
Well,
of how
yeah.
to create.
The
That's
city has built 4 schools.
very good period with good policies and participation.
It made a neighborhood because it used to be
It
dead. and-
did, I mean, that's
But
good.
who can argue against converting a vacant office building?
I think we're all in agreement on that.
Right.
Yeah, but it's not just the zoning, you need the multiple dwelling order change.
Right.
There are all sorts of other pieces.
Yeah.
So just because you do zoning, and unfortunately, we don't control the multiple dwelling.
Okay, it does say, we legalized conversions for buildings through 1990. So it's,
So
why that?
Everyone
That's
the
the
ones that
question.
are technically obsolete,
That's what I
the ones that are
said.
technically obsolete.
That's the
what I was
question.
thinking,
That's
yeah.
what I-
The time, why
Oh,
a year?
literally
It's
technically,
arbitrary.
that they don't
They
They
don't
don't have
support,
cables, they don't support modern technology.
they don't support the current technology very well, and their floor plates are smaller and so forth and so forth.
I would have thought they would have gone for 2000. I mean.
All right, that's a question we're gonna
Yeah.
have.
All right.
Yeah.
Not one we're gonna answer.
Yeah, yeah.
1900.
Question is, why is there 1990 cut off? And is it before or after
Yeah,
1990?
so I'm gonna send a list of, to
It's
city planners.
Yeah,
a
Right,
very
we all-
arbitrary number because it doesn't tie into any other regulatory changes or
Yeah,
anything
don't have-
in the market.
Sorry, if the landlord determines this is vacant and not.
No, it
complete,
adds the.
what does it matter when it's built?
I agree. It doesn't matter.
Right.
I think it
It should not matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
No, it.
Okay, all right.
it establishes.
So we have, I
Yes,
think we have our consensus and our questions on
Number 2.
number 2. Okay, now, number 3 is town center zoning. Legalized housing above businesses in low density areas. Sure. Again, not an up or side thing, but sounds good.
I'm all about it.
Vacant storefronts.
Okay, what is, this actually is Amsterdam and Columbus.
That's low density.
These are zoned low dense, fairly low density areas.
But what this is aimed at, as I
No, I know.
recall, is to in the outer boroughs, it's almost impossible to do anything other than a one-family home.
Yeah.
So this would convert, this would enable. Well, I know, but on other things, it is. And this enables as I understand it, they can build up to 5 stories.
Yeah, so if you have a deli,
Yeah.
you can build
On
above it.
commercial street, you see on a residential district, they cannot put commercial.
No, I understand.
Yeah, but the idea is if you have a taxpayer, you can take down the taxpayer, build apartments over, do a first floor retail. The problem is, and I mean, having built a number of similar types of buildings around the city, there's a very scarce market for a lot of this retail once you build it. I mean, what's one project we did a fresh food store, and it was designed for that. And we were lucky to get somebody who took half the space.
They're saying the retail is too weak.
Weak is in most locations, yeah, because the density is low at the
But
beginning,
this only applies to
Retrofitting,
existing
yeah.
businesses.
and there's no parking.
Yes.
So it's above businesses. So
Yeah.
the
We're
business already has to already exist.
The bodega
Yeah,
is one, there's
nothing
nothing
new
above
built.
it.
Yeah, exactly.
Now built above it.
Yes.
I mean, if you're gonna go shopping for 2 weeks of groceries,
This is something in the market.
Exactly.
it
Exactly.
actually
Famous last word.
hasn't.
No, we've seen it happen in the Bronx, where we created large, density buildings. And all of a sudden, the whole area has these new, not only food stores, but every type of store. And you wonder where you are, this is still the South Bronx.
Mhm.
And that's 140th and 138th and St. Anne's and Third Avenue that will all burn down. So it's potentially, I think, a good thing.
Yeah. I think we all agree.
Or
Okay. 4, remove costly parking mandates. Reduce housing costs by making parking optional in new buildings.
Yes.
No brain.
Oh, good.
Nobody disagrees.
Yeah, no, great.
I
Okay.
disagree. Just kidding.
I will tell you, having people in the outer boroughs have a different view.
Next,
Okay, next, accessory dwelling units. Allow backyard cottages, garage conversions, and basement apartments,
This is good.
giving homeowners extra cash and providing space for multi-generational family.
this was my proposal.
Yeah, but this isn't an Upper West
The
Side.
ADUs.
Yeah, we have a lot of brownstones.
They don't have garages in the back to convert into accessory dwelling. If they have garages in the back, we have another problem.
I mean,
Yeah, but this is.
This is citywide, and yes, it is.
Sorry, I have to raise my hand.
go ahead.
Okay.
So the question is, if you have a brownstone, correct me if I'm wrong. If you have a brownstone, this proposal would allow you to put a cottage, a garage, or a basement apartment back there. Am I right?
Not necessarily.
No,
Not
it's-
necessarily, but might it allow
No,
you?
if you have one, it allows you to
Yeah.
rent it out.
That's my question.
Rent out your basement.
It's not about the creation of new.
There's still rules about backyard,
Exactly.
And once again, in the multiple dwelling law, there are rules about
Yeah,
basic
you still have to abide by the existing rules,
sellers and other.
right? So if you were able to build one before, that whether or not you can, that has not changed, but now you can rent it out. That's the change.
Yeah, but
right?
I had presented this to the building department 10 years ago. But I suggested,
It's not changing whether or not you
That-
can
no, that about
create.
a resident.
First, Shelley, please, and then we'll come to
Sure,
you.
please.
Go ahead.
It's not, this is not changing one's ability to create an accessory dwelling unit on one's property. It's just saying you can rent one out if you have one. So all the existing rules about whether or not you can create one
Mhm.
still exist.
Mm-hmm.
If you have one, this is
So
suggesting. that
this
you
is
can
just
rent
about
out.
what you can do
But what were
with
you
it,
able to
not the
do before
creation of the
Correct.
unit.
It was just an unused.
Got it, got it,
Correct.
got it. Okay, thank you for the
Correct.
clarification.
So the
Sorry.
point about the going on for example, basement units, right, subject to flooding.
That's what concerns me.
But there's
Exactly that.
Well, I was thinking that, I thought.
I'm sorry.
Flood zone.
Okay.
We're still on the same point. We're still on the same point. Go ahead.
So,
I'm
and I
satisfied.
discussed this with the building department 10 years ago.
Uh-huh.
There were a number of
Subject
issues
to
with.
special regulations in flood zones, specifically because of that.
But there's also been continuing pressure and changes by HPD
I'm sorry, Shelley. I just.
That's
make
fine, you-
apartments, basements which are habitable now in order to obtain more units, in general. And in fact, to, in a way, legalize what has been what has been practiced. And that's been pushed now for the last 2 years. So I think they want to continue that.
I think with each of these items, we should ask the question, how does this apply if at all? So,
That's a good
It
idea.
applies if you have a brownstone.
No,
and you can
No,
just-
but
question we should ask them.
let's do that.
Just to.
That's a
the
good
question
idea.
is more in terms of-
There are very, very, very many apartments in our district that are at what is usually called the garden level. Some people would call it the basement. They're subject to multiple dwelling law, they're subject to all sorts of laws, but they're already there and they can be rented when they are. This particular proposal is very much aimed at the outer boroughs, very much not relevant to our district. And it is not without controversy, if one comes to it from the point of view, which I do know, of somebody with a single family neighborhood, think of Nassau County, but we're not talking Nassau County, we're thinking the outer boroughs. So I think it's not, I'm not very comfortable with our taking the position of, oh, sure, why not? When people who have a stake in this issue, our district just doesn't. It's not an absolute no-brainer.
Richard, I have a comment about that. I have seen dwellings on the Upper West Side where they have extended homes on top of the roofs. So since they already exist, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
not that.
But this is.
Yeah, but it says here, if it's a dwelling unit, accessory dwelling unit. So what about those buildings that we have in our area that they have dwelling
It
units on
only
top of the
applies to
roofs?
existing structure.
Well, we do have some that are
Well,
already
then-
existing, that's what I'm saying.
If they're existing, they're probably permitted and, and there's a C.
You just go to the language that's here, it says that
But it's really not a single family.
Those are not.
Overarching.
I agree.
Maybe we should think about how we wanna treat all these things that don't apply as much to CB7, and like, is there a way we kind of address them more generally and say, we agree with this policy in that it would create affordable housing, but like understand that other communities might. Just is there a way to be supportive of more housing while acknowledging that it applies differently in different places? I just don't want us to get like bogged down in the details when it isn't applicable, but be supportive of housing when.
Yeah.
I'm just not convinced that this doesn't apply.
Yeah, well, that's the same.
I'm sure it applied 1 or 2 or 10 buildings in the district.
Well, for each one of these, we're gonna ask the question.
For 99.9% it doesn't. Why don't we, I think I agree with her that what are the important ones that impact us?
If we continue presenting the questions.
Yep.
And we need to.
Okay.
Respond.
Okay, so number 6, transit-oriented development. Legalize 3 to 5 story apartment buildings on qualifying sites near public transit and low density areas.
On our property.
That's for suburbs. It's for suburbs.
Yeah, not our problem, but I think a great idea. That
We
should
can have a
support.
category called okey dokey.
Yeah, we support it. Number 7.
Whatever you say.
Campuses. Make it easier for campuses like churches to add new buildings, bringing money for repairs, new facilities and housing.
I thought this was kind of random.
Now, does this mean Columbia?
Yeah.
Or does it
I
mean,
think it could-
New York City Housing Authority?
Yeah.
It could
It makes
apply
the
to
housing
apply to
authority.
all.
The housing authorities have subject to this. They have,
Okay.
yeah, it's totally separate.
Our presenter has something to say, maybe.
Yeah, so coincidentally, in a previous job, I worked,
State.
I'm sorry,
Please.
in a previous job, coincidentally,
Sorry, one at a time, if that.
I worked in affordable housing development in partnership with community-based organizations. And so the community-based organizations we worked with were churches. So a lot of them have land that they own, where it's just like kind of like undeveloped lots, where they decide they want to build houses for the community. So we would do projects with them. And I think like it sort of like says in the text, sometimes like there's a lot of zoning rules which get in the way of that. So they have this land which they could use for housing and they would like to use for housing, but they're not able to. And same thing for university campuses, just other like specific situations. I think that's what they're getting at.
The bigger problem with the church is the height limitation. the killers every single time. Because you can't have a church with a 9 foot ceiling.
So why don't we ask what,
Yeah.
what are the issues, like the impacting the possibility of this happening?
And then the problem with the, things like the campuses is that they're usually set up in areas with high factor zoning. And yet you're trying to build something on a architectural zoning, and you have to make it look under both calculations.
I'm not sure this doesn't apply. We need to.
Probably does. Well,
This campus here and I get. They're pretty much already in control of what they're building on their real estate. An example that we had in this district, however, maybe 15 years ago now, is I think it's 2 large buildings that were built on the call it campus, but the site of St. John the Divine, the cathedral there. It involved landmark issues, it involved zoning issues and all sorts of stuff. And these 2, I don't think they're subsidized. I think they're market rate, but I'm not sure. Buildings that certainly visually were like a big deal. But that's one example, I think. If there are other churches that have more unbuilt upon real estate in our district, I'm not aware of any that has the kind of empty ground level square footage that St. John the Divine had, but maybe we've got some.
But they're in development rights also.
Yeah, well, that's it, but the question of air rights is completely different.
Or overbuilt.
That's not what this is.
Well, but using the Columbia area, there are 3 or 4 major examples of religious institutions that just went ahead and built whatever. And that's the Union Theological.
Yes.
And Jewish Theological. And now Riverside has moved a little bit differently and said, okay, we are going to use that land, but we're going to do some affordable housing. But Columbia went and has done anything and everything whenever it could.
Yeah.
And now it's being pressured a little bit. So it's a good example, and yet one that is not.
But I think, Ethel, and I could be wrong about this, that the Jewish Theological Seminary and Union went up. Whereas this is talking about from the ground.
Right.
Yeah, but I think, okay, I won't take more time.
I think,
Yeah, this really is vacant.
once again, outside of our district.
Okay.
Yeah.
But so just 10
Okay,
minutes.
the final one, small and shared housing, lift restrictions on homes with shared kitchens or other facilities.
This relates to SROs and.
Yeah.
Well, this also takes. This also required a big change in HPD and understanding how people live in this century as opposed to 1935, which was the basis of their models that they had for years.
Well, there's a new love affair at HPD with bringing back SRO.
Well, I mean, yeah,
That's good.
Right?
yeah, well, this is why supportive housing and the micros, but then that's still, there are problems with that too.
I think we
But
need
that's
an
our own
explanation of this.
Of what they mean.
Of what they
And
mean.
what they have,
Illustration.
they have illustrations, we want to see what they're doing and whether it actually works with HPD.
Absolutely.
They still have the minimum size for an apartment, I think it was like 425 square feet.
It was 400 and then they kind of changed that.
Okay, I think they're.
That those
should
25
definitely go.
square feet are really.
How many?
But if you put it in supportive housing, then it's smaller.
Right, but if it's not support housing, if it's just a really small apartment, I think
You
that's.
can, you can do it. I've done it. You can do it, but then you have to do.
Just like a Murphy bed.
So I did building, it was,
The Museum of the City of New York had this 300 square foot apartment that you could go in, it was required.
It's in the law.
Had 3 functions, like the bed turned into a dining table.
The 96th Street thing that we just built.
Yeah.
They're gonna have the, what do they call micro?
Yeah, micro units.
Micro units, which I think is a great.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of the. No, it's. It's not affordable.
It's market rate.
You can, no, it's not market rate, it's 50, buildings 50. Yes, but the affordable portion, the desire is going. I think it's higher than the AMI.
Oh, really?
If it's not 100%. I mean, I actually stagger, I don't remember the numbers. But some of it is 100% of AMIs, some of it's 80. And we lobbied for lower, lost. Like, yeah, and apparently, I mean, it's. HPD was convinced by the developer that they couldn't do it. You know,
And the council.
AMI.
The council person that kind of supported higher.
All right, so we have,
Previous council.
Okay.
we have a list of questions which I will send to city planning. City planning will be here at the next meeting to present on this. And then afterwards, we will have a discussion and a resolution.
Quickly, through some questions to everybody.
I will, yeah, yeah. I'll write them out.
Gonna want to find what's Stephanie.
So, Mark, thanks very much. And I just want to commend you for staying for the rest of the meeting. Maybe on one issue, stay for the whole meeting.
I haven't had input.
Yeah.
And I might come to the next one.
You're welcome.
Be a regular.
Do you live in the area? Do you live in the area?
No, sir, actually, I live in Bushwick, but yeah.
Young cool kids.
Yeah, we, if you attend more than one meeting, we charge food.
Start coming to the mall?
Anything else, any new, old?
Motion to adjourn.
Right? Who said that committee?